Easy. I got no respect the day I was born.
Really?
No respect. The doctor picked me up and smacked me. I found out the nurse, she got a few in too, you know. I was a lonely kid too, Johnny. Oh,
yeah,
was I
lonely, huh?
Even in the park, I had no friends.
Really?
I remember the seesaw. I had to keep running from one end to the other. I grew up, I was lonely too, and I grew up.
Yeah.
I couldn't get dates with girls.
Girls didn't?
No, with girls, they go for a guy with looks. Everything is looks, you know. But this thing's more important than looks. It's underneath what counts. Soul, depth.
Right.
That's what's important, not looks. Now, how many times you take a walk in the street, you see a tall, handsome man walking arm in arm with a short, fat, ugly girl. I never saw that. Did you?
Never saw that at all. Never saw that.
Well, looks don't mean nothing. Man, I got a niece, an ugly girl. She got married. She's happy. She married an ugly guy.
Right.
And today they got two very ugly kids.
Ugly kids, yes.
In fact, they're all so ugly in a family album. They only keep the negatives. I'll tell you what's more important than looks is love. You got to have love.
Love is
and
important.
I got plenty of love in me, Johnny.
That's
plenty. I love
thing.
a lot of things.
Love.
I love sports. I love music, and
right.
one of my kids. I got no respect.
Good morning. It is Wednesday, March the 1st, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer, we will have no free lunch, a legal tip, Kaylee McEnany, and Tucker Carlson. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
My fundamental disagreement with all Keynesian and monetarist demand-siders is that you devalue the importance of money's function as a unit of account. In classical economics, which concentrates entirely on production, supply, not consumption, demand, transactors in the exchange economy have more concern with money as a constant accounting unit than as a medium of exchange or store of value. In producing and exchanging across time and space, Keynesians and monetarists automatically downgrade this function of money as they attempt to manipulate the national aggregate economy. Keynesians cannot break the habit of trying to change the terms of trade with other countries by manipulating the value of the accounting unit. What a mess they created. Jude Winniski. As I've gotten older and had to fight harder to control my weight, I've often used a similar analogy to what Winniski uses here, that I cannot manage my weight by adjusting my scale. What we want as free marketeers is indeed money to be a mere unit of account. Sound money leads to a stable medium of exchange where market forces can adjudicate the value of the goods and services transacting, but the accounting unit is reliable.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. All right, so from Law Stash Law Firm, we have he's talking about, can police search a passenger of a vehicle after making a routine traffic stop? It's about 7 minutes long.
Police then search you and pat you down for weapons, even though there is no reasonable suspicion that you've committed any crimes? Let's find out. I'll talk about a Supreme Court case, Arizona versus Johnson, where three people are riding together in one vehicle. They get pulled over because the vehicle's registration is expired. One of the officers begins writing the ticket to the driver. Now, this is just a civil offense, so he's going to get a ticket and he's going to be let go. While the officer is writing this ticket, another officer begins talking to Mr. Johnson, who's a passenger in the vehicle. By the way, there was no reasonable suspicion that any of the passengers or the driver committed any other crimes. The officer asks Mr. Johnson to step out of the vehicle. Based on how he's dressed and where he's living and some other information, she realizes that he might be in a gang. So she believes that he's armed and dangerous. So she decides to pat him down for weapons. While she's conducting a search, she finds a firearm. Mr. Johnson is charged with possession of a firearm for somebody who's not supposed to have it. Felon in possession. Now the question becomes, was she allowed to pat him down and search him without any reasonable suspicion that he committed a crime? The Fourth Amendment protects you against unreasonable searches and seizures, and usually we require the officers to have probable cause and a warrant before they can search an individual. Now, of course, there are exceptions to the rule. And the Supreme Court told us in Terry versus Ohio that officers can pat the outside of the clothing for weapons if two things are true. Number one, that they stopped an individual lawfully. And number two, that they have reasonable suspicion to believe that that person is armed and dangerous. Now, Mr. Johnson argues that even if it's true that the officer had reasonable suspicion that he's armed and dangerous, he was never lawfully stopped. He was a passenger in a vehicle. He did not commit any crimes. Let's talk about Terry versus Ohio for a minute. In that case, an individual is being stopped on the street, and the officer believed that he committed some sort of crime. In this case, we have a vehicle, which throws a wrench into this whole idea. The court acknowledges that the driver committed a minor traffic offense. But we all know that the passenger did not commit any crimes, and really there is no reason to detain that person. But the court tells us that the idea behind Terry versus Ohio is that we want to prevent violent encounters with police. And we want to make sure that the police officers feel safe and they're able to do their job. So they need to pat somebody down to make sure they don't have any weapons and the encounter doesn't become violent. That idea is equally true to the driver as to the passenger. Also, as a practical matter, the passenger is stopped when the vehicle is stopped. And completing the picture, under the Supreme Court case Brenlin, the Supreme Court held that the passenger, along with the driver, is seized from the moment the vehicle is stopped until that investigation is complete.
For the duration of a traffic stop, we recently confirmed, a police officer effectively and lawfully seizes everyone in the vehicle, the driver, and all passengers. In a traffic stop setting, we accordingly hold, the first Terry condition, a permissible investigatory stop, is met whenever it is lawful for the police to detain an automobile and its occupants pending inquiry into the traffic violation. To justify the stop, the police need not have, in addition, cause to believe any occupant of the vehicle is involved in criminal activity.
Under Supreme Court case Brenlin, the passenger also has standing to challenge whether the stop is constitutional. And because he's lawfully stopped, that satisfies the first element of Terry versus Ohio. Because he's legally stopped, plus because the officer believed he's armed and dangerous, the officer was able to pat him down without violating his Fourth Amendment. If you enjoyed this video, please click like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button so next time I post, you'll be first to know.
And that was the Law Stash law firm talking about whether or not it is legal to frisk somebody or search somebody that's a passenger in a vehicle. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now Kaylee McEnany from Fox News about Lori Lightfoot.
So we begin in Chicago, where Mayor Lori Lightfoot suffered a crushing re-election defeat in a race seen as a referendum on liberal crime policies. Lightfoot, once praised by the left as a political rock star for being the city's first black woman and openly gay mayor, is now the first mayor denied a second term, get this, in 40 years. Crime soared under Lightfoot's watch. Since 2019, murders jumped nearly 40%, and car theft skyrocketed a whopping 140%. Meanwhile, a recent poll shows that an overwhelming number of Chicagoans say that the city is on the wrong track. But Lightfoot, well, she doesn't attribute her loss to any of that. Instead, she claims she was treated unfairly because she's a black woman in America. She conceded the race last night after coming in third and failing to advance to a runoff.
We didn't win the election today, but I stand here with my head held high and a heart full of gratitude. And regardless of tonight's outcome, we fought the right fights and we put this city on a better path. No doubt about it.
So that better path, Ryan, included the highest homicide rate in 25 years, 63% of Chicagoans not feeling safe.
It's one of the rare times where you lie in your concession speech. I mean, there's nothing to what she said. Also, did you say 60% think they're on the wrong track? The other 40% have already left Chicago. Could
Right.
be reached for comment. The only thing now, they lead the nation in empty stores because this one's beautiful city, terrible winter, but beautiful city cannot get anyone to rent their commercial real estate because they can't have businesses. The quality of life have disappeared. I mean, the Cubs even want to leave. This is terrible. No one has really performed worse than Mayor Lightfoot. Everything she's touched has turned away. Think about some of her policies. Let's only deal with journalists of color. Let's go ahead and defame and diminish the cops. And let me just add this. She also added one of the first ones, I believe, to say cops can no longer chase down would-be suspects. Go ahead and let them go. So I feel bad for the person taking over, but anything they do will look as a positive. But in that whole list, not one Republican. And it's time for Republicans to try to get back the cities. Even if you get 2% in 2023, by 2033, if your policies start to resonate, it'll be a different deal.
I certainly hope so. You know, Harris, the problems for Lori Lightfoot, yes, the crime. She also made a lot of enemies. New York Times said this, the blunt, tough-talking persona that earned Mayor Lightfoot early affection and respect turned into something else, the image of a mayor with an exhausting capacity for feuds and insults, whether aimed at her own staff, city employees, or fellow elected officials, or I'll just add to that, former White House press secretaries, because I called out crime in her city. We have the tweet, we'll pop it up. Rather than focusing on the victims of crime, she engaged in the same insults pointed out by the New York Times, saying, hey, Karen, watch your mouth, referring to me at the time. Wow.
Wow. So not the first touch with a little racist talk there.
No.
Yeah, not the first. I was really surprised that since her acumen, as it would be, the merits that she sort of sailed in on were immutables. Her hair texture, the color of her skin, and her gender. But you know what? She said that the reason she might lose yesterday, I don't know if you saw her at the mics, is because there were 6 other black people in the race, and that she should be the only one. So she's been confused about those issues for a while, and I had 2 guests on, one Democrat, one Republican yesterday, and they both agreed that's going to hurt her. And a few hours later, we found out just how much. And I think that those business owners, when they were making it really, really clear that they couldn't do business because their shoppers didn't feel safe and that they were having to spend an inordinate amount of money to keep their goods inside their stores from being stolen.
Smash and grab.
Those business owners made a huge deal. So the question is, do they go for Vallis, one of the ones who's up now for the runoff, or do they go for Brandon, the other guy, who is farther to the left than Lori Lightfoot? They aren't that far apart in the percentages from last night.
It's an interesting choice. You know, we'll see. And Emily, I do think with Lori Lightfoot, she had a proclivity for engaging in social media that perhaps marginalized the problems of her community. We remember her singing. Here's her dancing. We have some images of that will play. This just isn't a good look. And in fact, a councilman called her a great unifier because she was so good at unifying support against her.
The proof is in the pudding, as we saw last night. You know, you introed this, Kaylee, by saying how the left deemed her a political rock star. Mm-hmm. And she underscores exactly how and why you can be a political rock star and then utterly fail at your job. It is why Americans are so exhausted by politicians, because they've checked certain boxes from the left that the left deems necessary or important, and then they do nothing in that job. Keep in mind that during her role there as her tenure as mayor, that any form of criticism that was levied at her, including calling her out for those abusive emails, remember when she would email multiple times, 25 plus times, things that would get anyone in real life land fired, she said it was because of her race and her gender. And then after her concession speech, a reporter asked, were you removed because of your race and gender? And she said yes. Mm-hmm. This is someone who, if she cared so much about race and gender, would have turned a wider eye to crime, given that the majority of the victims there of crime in her city were young African-American men. Where were they? Where were the people she champions to support by lip service that were the ones dying by the hundreds under her watch? So she's an utter failure, rock star or not, she's done.
Yeah, in 2021, she said 99% of the criticism against her was because of race and gender. She told Politico, this came out yesterday, I remember Rahm Emanuel appearing on the cover of Time magazine. The headline was basically like, tough guy for Chicago. No woman or woman of color is ever going to get that headline, Kennedy.
Oh, absolutely. That is a falsehood. And I think people would love to see the city succeed. People would have liked to have seen her succeed. And when your city is safe, so much is forgiven. In New York City, after Rudy Giuliani became mayor in 1993, the city was much safer. It took some time, but, people are like, yeah, it's a little dirty and taxes are high, but I can walk in Central Park at night. People don't have that sense of safety in big cities, and Chicago is ground zero for that. And she couldn't take care of that aspect of it. And from safety follows economic prosperity. Those two things are married. The perception that you can live and shop and thrive in a city depends on how people feel. And she was not able to deliver that one thing. And for anyone else who's running for mayor in a big city, this is a textbook of what not to do. When violent crime has gone up 162% in your town in just 2 years, the second half of your term, you have done something wrong. It doesn't matter about her immutables. The things that matter, she completely ignored, and this is how she paid with her political life.
And now Chicago left with Vallis, endorsed by the police union, or Johnson, endorsed by the teachers union, who wrecked the children of Chicago.
And keep in mind, too, he said it's a political goal to defund the police. I mean, I'm sure he doesn't want to run on that now, but he absolutely said it. So the other thing to keep in mind with her is she was the one who went out of her way to turn away from Donald Trump when he offered the National Guard to straighten out the crime that's going through the roof. I'm not going to blame you. You just took over. Let me help you out, the National Guard. Instead of teaming up, she divided, she rejected. So then you knew she was a political animal right there.
Well, she chose politics all the time.
Remember the hairstyle?
But that's her choosing herself.
Right. That's
she
true.
had
During
to
the
get
pandemic.
her fro done in the middle of a lockdown and then tell people that it was important because she was in the public eye.
Right. She said the people of Chicago expect her to look good.
And in the process of all this, she lost the teachers union, which was really interesting. So you do have this dichotomy where Johnson, worse than Mayor Lori Lightfoot, he could be in control. And we saw what happened in a pandemic. The teachers unions ruled the city thanks to Lori Lightfoot.
And she got, keep in mind, she had half of the percentage of what the 33% was of the leader there. And I feel like what we're seeing, too, is sort of a mirror image of what we saw in Portland, which is essentially a buffet of socialism. So I feel like there's one hurdle down, which is that, yes, she's been removed. Thank goodness common sense has prevailed, that desperation prevailed. But I hope that the next step, to your point earlier, sure, there's no Republicans, but hopefully the at least police union endorsed candidate is the one that prevails, because the lives of Chicagoans depend on it. Hey, everyone.
So that was Kaylee McEnany, actually not McInerney, and Kaylee McEnany on Fox News and talking about Lori Lightfoot's big loss. Not only did she lose, and she's been apparently the first Chicago mayor in 40 years to lose re-election, but she lost big. She only got, I think it's 16% of the vote. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, 8 minutes with Tucker Carlson.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight.
Here is the main thing you need to know about Joe Biden. He is 80 years old, rather. He was born in 1942 in the first half of the last century. The year Biden was born, only 36% of American households had a telephone. Nearly half of them did not have indoor plumbing. Joe Biden turned 80 last November. This fall, he will be 81. If Biden were to serve a second full term as president, he would be 86 years old. In other words, 4 years from 90. These are not trivial facts about Joe Biden. These are the central facts of Joe Biden's life. Joe Biden's age defines him, and all of us. That's true for every person. Age is just a number, you will hear people say, but they are lying to themselves. Age is more than a number. Age is an expression of the core biological reality of human existence, which is that at some point it comes to a close. Age is the way that we chart our progression from birth to death as we pass from this world, as billions before us have, and are replaced by others. That used to be called the cycle of life. No one has ever changed it. No one ever will. So our choice is between accepting a reality we cannot alter or denying that reality even exists. The Democratic Party has chosen the latter. Tomorrow is March 1st. That means a year from today we'll be in the middle of presidential primary season. Joe Biden has given every indication that he plans to participate in that and that his party is firmly behind him. The DNC has already changed the primary calendar to make South Carolina, which is a machine state where the outcome can easily be scripted, the very first contest. And that was not an accident. It was done. It was changed to help Joe Biden win. Biden says he's strongly considering running again. Biden's wife, of course, says she very much hopes he will run. And most tellingly of all, no mainstream Democrat has announced a run against him. So as of tonight, Joe Biden is in the race for the Democratic nomination, and as of tonight, he will get the nomination. And that's just amazing if you think about it. Joe Biden would be 82 years old on Inauguration Day. That is 8 years older than the average life expectancy for men in this country. So virtually everyone in his high school class will be gone by then, but Joe Biden will be just beginning his second term as president of the United States. Would that be healthy for America? Would it be healthy for Joe Biden? Of course not. It's awful. 82-year-old men should not be running countries. They're not strong enough mentally or physically. Everybody knows that, very much including any 82-year-old man you ask. The people around Joe Biden certainly know that. How could they not know that? They watch him, and you do too. Here's Joe Biden in Warsaw, Poland, just last week.
The questions we face were as simple as they were profound. Would we respond? Or would we look the other way? Would we be strong? Or would we be weak? Would we, all of our allies, would be united or divided?
So we play clips like that a million times for you over the past few years. We could play a million more because Joe Biden talks like that every day. At this point, it's how he talks. Joe Biden is losing his ability to speak. That's not a secret. It's not something you learn from our confidential sources and are bringing to you for the first time tonight exclusively. That is obvious to the entire world. And you'll probably sound like that too if you make it to Joe Biden's age. We will also. It's not weird. It's natural. It's not an attack on Joe Biden, hardly. It's an observation. But because it's natural, we have been commanded to ignore it. Don Lemon got suspended from his show at CNN recently for suggesting that a presidential candidate in her 50s was, quote, past her prime. And that's odd, really. As a factual matter, what Don Lemon said is true. People in their 50s are literally, certainly physically, past their prime. That's a fact. Take it from someone who's 53. So why was that such a controversial point? Of all the demented things that Don Lemon has said over the years, noticing somebody's age is what blows up his career? Yes. Because that simple, commonplace observation, people weaken with age, points to a power that will forever remain beyond human authority, which is the power to control time. No matter how rich we are, we cannot prevent ourselves from getting older. We can buy Botox and hair plugs and facelifts. Joe Biden has bought all of that. But in the end, we degrade anyway because we are not God. Accepting this fact that we are not God, working within the preordained limits of nature, is the key to balance and happiness in this human life. Ignoring that fact leads to insanity, or in the case of modern America, it leads to the trans agenda and climate theology. If you asked 100 honest people to name the things that human beings cannot control, most would list biological sex and the weather.
You can't decide whether you're a boy or a girl. You are what you are born. Sorry. And nobody, try as we might, can make a sunny day. You don't manufacture it, you receive it. A sunny day either happens or it doesn't. It's not up to you. At best, we can try to predict the weather. We cannot determine the weather. Since the dawn of time, that has been so obvious that almost nobody's ever mentioned it. But saying it out loud is now heresy. And that's because our leadership class is at open war with nature. Nature is the final limit to their power, and so they hate it. They tell us they're in charge of human biology, even of DNA. Trans women are women, they screech. Meet our Lady Admiral. They brag about how they now control the weather. Too hot for you? Hold on, we'll change that with the Green New Deal. And they tell us, of course, that age no longer matters. Joe Biden may live forever. We've got AI now. It's all a ridiculous fantasy. They have no such power. They can't even keep the electrical grid running in the state of California. And on some level, they know that. They know how limited they are, which is why they become so hysterical in the face of physical reality, because it's a reminder of their limits. Do you remember this fall when that NBC reporter, a woman called Dasha Burns, dared to point out that John Fetterman's stroke had damaged him? Well, of course it had damaged him. Everyone could see it had damaged him. But to Fetterman's wife and the rest of the Democratic establishment and the rest of the press corps, saying something like that out loud was more offensive than any obscenity. Here's an outraged Mrs. Fetterman.
What a disservice that she did to not only my husband, but to anyone facing a disability and working through it. And I don't know how there were not consequences, right? I mean, there are consequences for folks in these positions who are any of the isms. I mean, she was ableist.
Well, she's an ableist, howled Giselle Fetterman, because someone had correctly pointed out that her husband was no longer able because he had a stroke. In other words, reality intruded on Mrs. Fetterman's fantasy, and therefore reality itself had to be shouted down and destroyed. You're seeing an awful lot of this attitude, that exact attitude recently from the people in charge. It's not a healthy sign. Wise leaders recognize the limits, the inherent limits of their power. They know that they're not in control of much, actually, because no one is. You can decide what to have for breakfast, that's up to you, but you cannot decide to become a woman. You can't choose to live to 100. You can't even choose to think clearly at 80. None of that is your choice, even if you're the president. Life, unfortunately, is a sexually transmitted, invariably fatal condition. That's not a bad thing. It's just true. And when you deny it, bad things happen.
And that was Tucker Carlson. The only thing that I want to comment on that is that about the age is that there are people that are more robust as they get older. There was a guy named Jack LaLanne. I don't know if any of my audience members remember Jack LaLanne, but he was a physical fitness guy on the television. And way back in the 50s, 60s, and I think 70s as well. And he lived until he was in his 80s or 90s, and he was quite vital throughout his life. So was, say, Betty White. So there are people, the issue should be not age, but vitality. And that's the issue with Joe Biden. It's not that he's 78 or 80 years old or however old he is. It is that he is declining. His mental faculties are declining. Physically, he looks rather weak. He looks unstable on his feet. And so he's not a picture of robust health. Now, there are people his age out there who do look that way. And those are people that I think could and perhaps should be elected president or elected to any other office in the United States. So again, the issue should be your health rather than your age. Back in a minute.